Welcome to a story that begins with an oath sworn by a child and ends with a city in flames. Imagine a boy, no older than 9, standing before an altar in a temple thick with incense, placing his small hand on the sacred offerings and swearing to his father that he will never be a friend of Rome. That boy was Hannibal Barca, and the civilization that forged him, Carthage, would become the single greatest threat the Roman Republic ever faced. But here is what most people never learn. Carthage was not merely a military rival. It was a commercial empire so wealthy, so sophisticated, so deeply woven into the fabric of Mediterranean trade, that its merchants reached the Atlantic coasts of Africa and Britain centuries before Rome could build a single warship. Its political system was so balanced that Aristotle praised it alongside Sparta. Its harbors were engineering marvels. Its agricultural science was so advanced that after Rome burned the city to the ground, the Roman Senate ordered Carthage's farming manuals translated into Latin and preserved. How does a civilization that powerful get erased from history? And why did Rome fear it so deeply that a senator ended every speech, no matter the topic, with the words, "Carthage must be destroyed"? This is the complete story we are about to tell. Not a summary, not a single battle, but the full journey across more than 1,000 years. We will begin on the shores of ancient Lebanon, in the Phoenician city of Tyre, where sailors invented the alphabet and mastered the sea. We will follow a princess named Elissa as she flees murder and founds a new city on a hill overlooking the Bay of Tunis around 814 before Christ. We will watch that city grow from a modest trading post into the wealthiest power in the Western Mediterranean, planting colonies from Sicily to Spain, controlling silver mines and grain fields, building a navy that ruled the waves for centuries. We will walk through its streets, its markets, its temples where the goddess Tanit was honored. We will meet its merchants, its farmers, its suffetes and senators. We will witness its wars against Greek Syracuse, its catastrophic clash with Rome across 3 Punic Wars, and the genius of Hannibal crossing the Alps with war elephants. We will stand at Cannae, where Rome nearly died, and at Zama, where Carthage did. We will see the city reborn under Roman rule, watch it become a center of Christianity, and follow it through Vandal conquest, Byzantine reconquest, and the Arab arrival that finally ended its life as a living city. And we will ask what survived, because something always survives. This story matters because Carthage represents a road not taken, a world where commerce rather than conquest built an empire, where naval power mattered more than legions, where wealth created influence without always requiring occupation. Its destruction shaped Rome, shaped North Africa, shaped the very idea of how empires remember their enemies. The echoes are still with us. If you enjoy complete journeys through the rise and fall of civilizations, through the full lives of empires that shaped our world, please subscribe so you never miss our next exploration. Each week, we bring you the entire story of a world that changed history. Now let us begin. Let us travel east to the ancient coast of Lebanon, where the cedar ships of Tyre first set sail toward the unknown. A narrow strip of coastline pressed between mountains and sea. The land is Lebanon, though it will not carry that name for centuries yet. Around 1,500 years before the Common Era, a chain of independent city-states clings to this shore, Byblos in the north, Sidon at the center, Tyre on its island fortress to the south, Berytus nestled between rocky headlands. Behind them rise the cedar forests of Mount Lebanon, dark and fragrant, their timber coveted by every power in the ancient world. Before them stretches the Mediterranean, vast and open, an invitation written in salt and wind. These are the Canaanite peoples whom the Greeks will later call Phoenicians, the purple people, named for the extraordinary dye they extract from the crushed glands of the murex sea snail. Thousands of these shells, cracked and heaped in reeking mounds along the Sidonian waterfront, yield tiny drops of pigment that stain cloth in hues ranging from deep violet to reddish crimson. A single pound of this Tyrian purple requires tens of thousands of shells and days of labor. The result is worth more than its weight in silver. Kings and priests across the Near East drape themselves in it. The dye becomes synonymous with power itself. But the Phoenicians offer the world something far more consequential than color. Sometime around 1100 years before the Common Era, scribes in Byblos begin refining a writing system of stunning simplicity, 22 consonantal signs, each representing a single sound. No more wedge-shaped cuneiform requiring hundreds of symbols. No more hieroglyphic complexity reserved for priestly elites. This alphabet can be learned in days, scratched onto potsherds, inked onto papyrus, carved into stone. It will travel with Phoenician merchants across every sea, passing to the Greeks, who add vowels, and onward to the Romans, whose Latin script descends directly from these Levantine letters. Nearly every alphabet in the Western world traces its ancestry to this narrow coast. Then catastrophe reshapes everything. Around 1200 years before the Common Era, the Bronze Age world collapses. The Hittite Empire disintegrates. Mycenaean Greece falls into darkness. Egypt retreats behind its borders. Assyria contracts. The great palace economies that once dominated trade shatter under the pressure of drought, migration, and the mysterious sea peoples who ravage coastlines from Anatolia to the Nile Delta. Cities burn across the eastern Mediterranean. Yet the Phoenician cities survive. Byblos is damaged but endures. Sidon rebuilds, and Tyre, protected by its island position, emerges from the catastrophe stronger than before. With the great empires weakened or gone, a power vacuum opens across Mediterranean trade routes. Tyre fills it. By the 10th century before the Common Era, under King Hiram I, Tyre enters its golden age. Hiram forges an alliance with King Solomon of Israel, supplying cedar wood, skilled craftsmen, and gold for the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. Tyrian ships sail joint expeditions to the distant land of Ophir, returning with precious metals and exotic goods. Tyrian merchants push westward with growing confidence. They establish trading posts on Cyprus, then reach the coasts of North Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, and the distant shores of Iberia. At Gades, beyond the Pillars of Hercules on the Atlantic coast of modern Spain, they tap into tin and silver networks stretching as far as the British Isles. Each settlement follows the same pattern: a sheltered harbour, a temple to Melkart, the city god of Tyre, warehouses for goods in transit. These are not conquests but commercial footholds, nodes in a web of exchange that spans the known world. In the harbours of Tyre, broad-hulled merchant galleys ride low under cargoes of cedar planks, amphorae of wine and oil, ingots of copper and tin, bolts of purple-dyed linen, and delicate glass vessels blown in coastal workshops. The air smells of pitch, brine, and rotting murex. Sailors speak a Semitic tongue closely related to Hebrew, pray to Melkart and Astarte, and navigate by stars their grandfathers named. They carry with them not armies but goods, not edicts but contracts. Their power rests not on territory seized, but on relationships maintained, on harbors connected, on the endless, profitable movement of things the world desires. From this tradition, from this restless commercial genius, born on a sliver of Levantine coast, a daughter city will soon rise on the shores of Africa and change the history of the Western world forever. The story begins in blood. In Tyre, around 814 before the Common Era, a king named Pygmalion sits on the throne of the greatest trading city in the Levant. He is young, ambitious, and consumed by greed. His sister Elissa, whom later Roman writers will call Dido, is married to Acabas, a priest of Melkart and one of the wealthiest men in the city. Pygmalion orders the murder of Acabas and seizes his fortune. But Elissa is no passive victim. She gathers a company of loyal nobles, loads ships with gold hidden beneath worthless cargo, and flees Tyre under cover of darkness. The fleet sails west, stopping at Cyprus to take aboard 80 young women as brides for the colonists. Then the ships turn south, toward Africa. The coast they reach is the northern shore of what is now Tunisia. A broad bay opens before them, sheltered from open-sea storms, rimmed by low hills covered in scrub and wild olive. A triangular peninsula juts into the water, and at its highest point rises a modest hill, Byrsa. The geography is extraordinary. 2 natural lagoons flank the peninsula, offering calm anchorage. The fertile valley of the Bagradus River stretches inland, promising grain and pasture. The site commands the narrow waste of the Mediterranean, where the African coast reaches closest to Sicily, barely 140 kilometers distant. Every ship passing between the eastern and western basins of the sea must cross within sight of this promontory. Elissa recognizes what the land offers. According to tradition, she negotiates with the local Libyan Berber chief for a parcel of land no larger than an ox hide. Then she cuts the hide into the thinnest possible strips and lays them end to end, encircling the entire hilltop. The ruse gives the settlement its name, Byrsa, from a Phoenician word later reinterpreted through the Greek word for hide. The new city is called Carthage, the new city, Carthage. Archaeology confirms what legend dramatizes. The earliest material layers beneath Byrsa Hill date to the late 9th century before the Common Era, aligning closely with the traditional founding date. Excavations reveal small mud brick structures with beaten earth floors, Phoenician red slip pottery, iron tools, and imported Greek geometric ware that helps fix the chronology. The settlers bring with them the skills of Tyre, metalworking, textile dyeing, pottery, navigation, and the alphabet. They also bring their gods. Within the first generations, a sacred precinct takes shape south of the settlement, the Tophet, an open-air sanctuary where urns containing cremated remains are buried beneath carved limestone stelae. This site will remain in continuous use for over 600 years. The earliest Carthaginians do not arrive as conquerors. They are refugees, traders, and pragmatists. The surrounding Libyan Berber populations are numerous and well-established. Carthage pays an annual tribute to local chiefs for the right to occupy its coastal strip. The relationship is transactional, not imperial. Berber farmers supply grain, livestock, and labor. Carthaginian merchants offer manufactured goods, metalwork, and access to Mediterranean trade networks. Intermarriage begins early. Punic inscriptions from later centuries reveal Libyan personal names woven into Carthaginian families, evidence of a cultural blending that will deepen over generations. The settlement grows slowly. Limestone quarried from nearby hills replaces mud brick. Streets follow the contours of the peninsula. Workshops cluster near the waterfront, where shipwrights repair hulls and merchants sort cargoes of Spanish silver, Sardinian copper, and African ivory. The harbour is still modest, wooden jetties extending into the lagoon, nothing like the monumental ports that will come later. But the location works. Ships from Tyre, Sidon, and other Phoenician colonies call regularly. Carthage becomes a waypoint, then a hub, then something more. On Bursa Hill, the evening light falls across rooftops of pale stone. Smoke rises from bronze working furnaces near the shore. The smell of frankincense drifts from the Tophet, where a mother places a small terracotta figurine beside a freshly buried urn. Below, in the harbour, a merchant galley flying Tyrian colours ties up alongside a vessel carrying grain from the Bagradus plain. The city is small, vulnerable, dependent on the goodwill of its neighbours and the continuity of trade. But it occupies perhaps the most strategically valuable point in the entire Western Mediterranean. From this hilltop, from this ox-hide bargain, an empire will grow. The shift begins not with ambition, but with catastrophe. In 701 before the Common Era, the Assyrian king Sennacherib lays siege to Tyre. The mother city endures, but its reach contracts. Phoenician colonies scattered across the western Mediterranean, once tethered to Tyrian authority, find themselves increasingly alone. And among them, Carthage begins to step forward, not as a daughter city awaiting instruction, but as a power in its own right. Along the North African coast, new settlements appear bearing Carthaginian influence. Small harbours carved into rocky shorelines, warehouses built from local sandstone, their floors stained with olive oil and the residue of salted fish. From the Gulf of Sidra to the Atlantic coast of what is now Morocco, Carthage extends a chain of trading posts, Leptis, Sabratha, Hadrumetum, Thapsus, each one a node in a tightening commercial web. These are not conquests in the Roman sense. They are arrangements, partnerships sealed with trade goods and mutual interest, anchored by Carthaginian ships that arrive with regularity and depart loaded with grain, hides, and ivory bartered from Berber communities of the interior. Across the sea, western Sicily becomes contested ground. At Motia, a small island connected to the Sicilian mainland by a narrow causeway, Carthaginian merchants build a fortified settlement surrounded by water. Its harbour, an artificial basin dug into the island's interior, shelters vessels from storms and enemies alike. Nearby, Panormus grows into a major port, its markets fragrant with spices carried from the eastern Mediterranean. On Sardinia, the settlement at Sulci processes metals, copper and lead drawn from the island's ancient mines. In the Balearic Islands, Carthaginian traders exchange wine and textiles for the services of slingers, whose accuracy will later become legendary on battlefields across the ancient world. Then, in 573 before the Common Era, the final blow falls on Tyre. Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon completes a 13-year siege that breaks the city's independence forever. The last thread connecting Carthage to its origins as a subordinate colony snaps. There is no mother city to defer to now. Carthage stands alone as the preeminent Phoenician power in the West. The Magonid dynasty consolidates this new authority. Under their leadership, Carthage transforms from a commercial city into something approaching a state, one that projects military force when trade alone cannot secure its interests. Carthaginian galleys patrolled the waters between Sicily and Sardinia, enforcing exclusive trading zones. The Strait of Gibraltar, that narrow passage between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, becomes a Carthaginian choke point. Beyond it lies Gades, the ancient Phoenician colony on the Atlantic coast of Iberia, and beyond Gades lie the silver mines of Tartessos. Silver flows eastward through Carthaginian hands, weighed, stamped, and redistributed across a network that now stretches from the tin sources of distant Britain to the ivory markets of sub-Saharan Africa. The warehouses of Carthage fill with the evidence of this reach. Amphorae of Iberian silver ore stacked beside bales of dyed wool from Sardinia. Elephant tusks from the African interior resting on beds of straw next to bundles of British tin wrapped in leather. The city's population swells. Its harbours grow crowded. But expansion brings collision. Greek colonists from Phocaea, pushing westward, establish settlements in Corsica and along the southern coast of Gaul. Their presence threatens Carthaginian trade routes. Around 535 before the Common Era, off the coast of Corsica near Alalia, a Carthaginian fleet allied with Etruscan naval forces engages the Phocaean Greeks. The battle is costly for all sides, but its outcome reshapes the western Mediterranean. The Phocaeans withdraw from Corsica. Carthage and its Etruscan allies divide spheres of influence. Etruria controls the Tyrrhenian coast. Carthage dominates the waters south and west. The treaty lines are invisible on the water, but absolute in practice. Carthaginian warships enforce them with bronze rams and disciplined crews. Any foreign vessel venturing into restricted waters risks seizure or destruction. The sea itself becomes Carthaginian territory, not land to be occupied, but lanes to be controlled, currents to be mastered, harbours to be held. By the middle of the 6th century before the Common Era, the transformation is complete. What began as a single colony clinging to a hilltop above the Bay of Tunis has become the centre of a commercial empire spanning thousands of miles of coastline. Its power rests not on legions or conquered provinces, but on ships, silver, and the careful management of distance. The purple dye that once defined Tyre now marks Carthaginian sails moving across open water, visible long before the hulls beneath them come into view. Yet an empire built on trade cannot be governed by traders alone. As Carthage's commercial reach extends across the western Mediterranean, the city on the Bay of Tunis develops something remarkable, a political system sophisticated enough to manage vast wealth, competing aristocratic ambitions, and the loyalties of distant colonies without collapsing into tyranny or civil war. The heart of this system stands atop Bursa Hill. Here, in a civic quarter overlooking the harbours below, the institutions of the Carthaginian Republic take physical form. A broad, open space serves as the agora, where citizens gather beneath the North African sun. Nearby rises the Senate House, its limestone walls enclosing a chamber where roughly 300 elders deliberate on matters of war, diplomacy, and finance. Inscribed stelae line the approaches, recording public decrees in the angular script of the Punic language, laws governing trade tariffs, temple dedications, treaties ratified with foreign powers. At the apex of executive authority sit two suffetes, elected annually. The word itself descends from the Phoenician term for judge, and these magistrates function as the Republic's highest civil officers. They preside over the Senate administer justice, and represent the state in religious ceremonies. Unlike kings, they hold power for a single year and cannot command armies in the field, a deliberate separation that prevents any individual from accumulating both civil and military authority. When Carthage wages war, it appoints generals independently, and those generals answer to the Senate upon their return. This architecture of restraint reflects a deep institutional fear of concentrated power. The Magonid family dominates Carthaginian politics through much of the 6th and 5th centuries before the Common Era, producing generals and suffetes across multiple generations. Yet even the Magonids govern within constraints. The Tribunal of 104, a judicial body drawn from the senatorial class, reviews the conduct of military commanders after their campaigns. Generals who fail or overstep face investigation, exile, even crucifixion. The tribunal functions as a check on ambition, ensuring that military glory does not translate automatically into political dominance. Aristotle, writing in the 4th century before the Common Era, examines this system in his treatise on politics and finds it worthy of comparison with Sparta and Crete. He notes that Carthage combines elements of monarchy in the suffete, aristocracy in the Senate, and democracy in the popular assembly, a mixed constitution that produces stability. He observes that when the suffetes and Senate agree, policy moves forward smoothly, but when they disagree, the matter passes to the assembly of citizens, giving ordinary Carthaginians a meaningful voice. He also notes a flaw. Wealth plays an outsized role. Offices are not merely won through merit or election, but influenced by the financial power of leading families. Magistracies can be purchased, and the richest clans steer policy towards their commercial interests. This is the essential tension within the Carthaginian Republic. The system prevents tyranny, but concentrates influence among a narrow merchant aristocracy. Senators arrive at the chamber on Byrsa Hill, wearing robes dyed in the purple that symbolizes their wealth. Their families own the trading fleets, the agricultural estates in the Bagradas Valley, the mining concessions in Iberia. Administrative seals pressed into clay bear the emblems of these great houses. Political alliances form around commercial partnerships, and rivalries between factions shape foreign policy for generations. Yet the system works. For centuries, Carthage avoids the cycle of tyrants and coups that devastates Greek Syracuse. Power transfers peacefully between suffetes each year. The Senate debates and decides. The tribunal holds generals accountable. The assembly provides a release valve for popular discontent. Foreign ambassadors arriving at the harbor and climbing toward Byrsa Hill encounter not a palace, but a functioning civic space. Magistrates in ceremonial dress, scribes recording proceedings, citizens petitioning for redress. This republic of merchants governs an empire without calling it one. Its strength lies not in rigid centralization, but in flexible authority, distributed among institutions designed to balance ambition against accountability. The same pragmatism that builds trading networks across the sea shapes the political order at home. Power shared carefully, watched constantly, and never entrusted to a single hand for long. Beyond the civic halls and counting rooms, beyond the harbor where merchants tally silver and grain, another kind of power shapes Carthaginian life. It is older than the Republic, older than the colony itself, carried across the sea from Tyre in the memories of priests and the forms of ritual that bind a people to their gods. At the heart of Carthaginian worship stands Baal Hammon, lord of fertility and sky, whose name echoes the ancient Semitic traditions of the Levant. Beside him rises Tanit, called the face of Baal, a goddess whose influence grows steadily from the 5th century before the Common Era until she becomes the supreme deity of the city. Her symbol, a triangle topped by a circle, arms outstretched like a figure in prayer, appears carved on thousands of limestone stelae across Carthaginian sacred sites. It marks votive offerings, temple walls, amulets, and tomb entrances. No image in the Punic world is more recognizable. The temple of Eshmun, god of healing, crowns a hill overlooking the city. Pilgrims climb stone steps worn smooth by centuries of bare feet, passing terracotta votive figurines shaped as human limbs, eyes, and organs, each one a prayer for restoration. Incense smoke drifts from bronze burners shaped like open hands. Priests in linen robes conduct rites inherited from Phoenician tradition, yet transformed by contact with Libyan, Greek, and Egyptian practice. Melkart, the great god of Tyre, retains his honored place, and Astarte's presence lingers in fertility rites and coastal shrines. This is not a closed religious world, but a living synthesis, absorbing influences while preserving a distinctly Punic character. South of the residential quarters, near the edge of the oldest settlement, lies the Tophet, the most sacred and most controversial precinct in Carthage. It is an open-air enclosure filled with thousands of small sandstone urns buried beneath carved stelae. Archaeological excavation reveals layers spanning from the 8th to the 2nd century before the Common Era, each generation depositing its offerings deeper into the sacred ground. The urns contain cremated remains, overwhelmingly those of very young children and newborn infants, sometimes mixed with the bones of young animals. Greek and Roman writers describe the Mulk ritual in terms of horror. Children offered alive to Baal Hammon in times of crisis, placed in the arms of a bronze statue above flames. Diodorus Siculus and Plutarch record these accusations with vivid detail. Modern scholarship remains deeply divided. Some archaeologists argue the Tophet evidence confirms a practice of child sacrifice, pointing to the age of the remains and the dedicatory inscriptions on stela that use the word mulk, meaning a sacred offering. Others contend the Tophet served primarily as a cemetery for infants who died of natural causes, their cremation and burial a consecration rather than a killing, and that Greek and Roman accounts reflect cultural hostility rather than objective reporting. The physical evidence, tiny bones, carefully placed urns, inscriptions expressing gratitude to Tanit and Baal Hammon, permits both readings. What remains beyond dispute is the profound sacredness of the precinct itself and the intensity of devotion it represents. Priests occupy a powerful position within Carthaginian society. They manage temple estates, oversee public festivals, interpret omens, and serve as intermediaries between the divine and political realms. Major military campaigns and civic decisions require favorable signs. Religious authority and political authority intertwine without merging entirely. The Sufetes govern, but the gods must consent. Terracotta masks with exaggerated features, hollow eyes, and grimacing mouths appear in tombs and sanctuaries across the Punic world, from Carthage to Motia to Ibiza. Their purpose remains debated: protection against evil spirits, ritual performance, funerary guardianship, but their presence testifies to a spiritual world dense with unseen forces. Amulets of Egyptian origin, glass paste beads shaped as eyes, and small carved figures of Tanit circulate through every level of society. Religion is not confined to temples. It saturates domestic life, commercial ventures, and the rhythms of the agricultural year. The sacred city exists alongside the commercial city, inseparable from it. Every ship launched carries a prayer. Every harvest gathered returns a portion to the gods. The Tophet accumulates its silent testimony, stele by stele, urn by urn, across 600 years of unbroken devotion. A record written not in words alone, but in ash, stone, and the enduring mystery of what a civilization will offer to powers it believes hold its fate. But it is the sea that makes Carthage what it is. The prayers carried on departing ships ride hulls, built not by devotion alone, but by an industrial mastery that no Western Mediterranean power can match. By the 5th century before the Common Era, Carthage commands the most formidable navy the ancient world west of Greece has ever seen, and the instrument of that command lies hidden behind the city's southern walls, a harbour complex of extraordinary design. 2 basins sit connected by a narrow channel. The outer harbour, rectangular in shape, serves the merchant fleet, a vast anchorage where trading vessels unload grain, silver, tin, ivory, and dyed cloth from every corner of the Western Sea. But beyond it, accessible only through a passage barely wide enough for a single warship, lies the Carthon, the circular military port. Its form is unlike anything else in the ancient world. A ring of water roughly 325 meters in diameter surrounds a central island, and along both the island's perimeter and the harbour's inner wall, covered ship sheds rise in ordered rows. Each shed shelters a single warship, hauled stern first onto a slipway of dressed stone. Archaeological excavation has confirmed the capacity. Approximately 220 vessels housed simultaneously, dry-docked and ready for launch. On the central island stands the Admiralty, where the commanding officer surveys every berth through a single panoramic vantage. The ships themselves are products of refined engineering. Carthaginian warships, triremes and later quinqueremes, are built from pine and cedar planking joined by mortise and tenon technique, their hulls sheathed in pitch and sometimes lead. Bronze rams project from the prow at the waterline, cast in foundries near the harbour. The vessels are lighter and faster than most contemporary designs, optimized for ramming speed and rapid maneuvering. Skilled crews of oarsmen, many of them Carthaginian citizens rather than slaves, train in coordinated rowing that allows a warship to pivot, accelerate, and strike with devastating precision. This naval power enforces a commercial monopoly across the Western Mediterranean. Carthage controls the sea lanes through treaties backed by force. The earliest known treaty with Rome, recorded by Polybius and dated to 509 before the Common Era, explicitly restricts Roman and Allied vessels from sailing beyond designated points along the North African coast, and forbids trade in Sardinia and Libya except under Carthaginian supervision. The message is unambiguous. These waters belong to Carthage. But the navy serves exploration as well as enforcement. Around 500 before the Common Era, a Carthaginian commander named Hanno leads a fleet of 60 pentaconters carrying 30,000 colonists, the number likely exaggerated, but the expedition itself attested by a Greek translation of his own account, inscribed at the temple of Baal Hammon. Hanno sails beyond the Pillars of Hercules, down the West African coast, founding settlements and encountering landscapes no Mediterranean sailor has recorded before. Volcanic eruptions, rivers teeming with hippopotami, and a forested island alive with creatures his interpreters call gorillae. Around the same period, another navigator, Himilco, sails northward into the Atlantic, reaching the tin-producing regions near Brittany and possibly the coasts of Britain, securing access to a metal essential for bronze production. Coastal watchtowers dot the shorelines of Carthaginian territories, Sardinia, western Sicily, the Balearic Islands, the North African littoral. Signal fires relay warnings of approaching fleets. Patrol squadrons enforce fishing rights and intercept unauthorized traders. Foreign vessels found in restricted waters are seized or sunk without negotiation. The Cothon hums with constant activity. Timber arrives from forests in the Atlas Mountains and from trading partners abroad. Shipwrights shape ribs and keels in open yards beside the water. Rope makers twist esparto grass and palm fiber into cables. Sailmakers stitch linen canvas. The smell of heated pitch mingles with sawdust and salt air. This is not merely a harbor, but a war machine concealed within a city, capable of launching an entire fleet within days. For nearly 3 centuries, no rival power seriously challenges Carthaginian naval supremacy in the Western Sea. The navy is the spine of the empire, the guarantor of its trade routes, the enforcer of its treaties, and the shield behind which its merchant wealth accumulates. Every amphora of wine, every ingot of silver, every bale of purple cloth that crosses the Mediterranean does so, because Carthaginian warships ensure it can. Yet the warships that guard the sea lanes protect something far more fundamental than trade. Inland from the harbor, beyond the city walls, the true wealth of Carthage spreads across the earth itself. The Bagradus River Valley, the broad, slow-moving waterway the later world will call the Megerda, cuts through some of the most fertile soil in the ancient Mediterranean. Here, the land is dark and deep, enriched by millennia of alluvial deposits carried down from the mountains of the interior. Wheat fields stretch toward the horizon in golden sheets, broken by groves of olive trees whose silver-green canopies shimmer in the afternoon heat. Fig orchards and pomegranate gardens line the irrigation channels. Vineyards climb the lower hillsides on carefully terraced slopes. This is not subsistence farming. Carthaginian agriculture operates on an estate scale that anticipates the great latifundia of later Roman Italy. Wealthy Carthaginian families own vast tracts of land worked by Libyan and Berber laborers, some free tenants paying rent in grain, others bound to the soil in conditions approaching serfdom. Overseers manage planting schedules, irrigation, and harvest with a precision that reflects generations of accumulated knowledge. The greatest codification of this knowledge belongs to Mago, whose 28-volume treatise on agriculture becomes so renowned that the Roman Senate, after destroying Carthage in 146 before the Common Era, orders it translated into Latin, the only Carthaginian text granted such honor. Mago writes on soil preparation, grafting techniques, olive pressing, livestock breeding, and the management of enslaved labor. His work influences Roman agronomists for centuries. Within the city itself, a population that at its peak reaches perhaps 300 to 400,000 inhabits, a dense urban landscape pressed between the harbors and the slopes of Bursa Hill. Residential quarters reveal courtyard houses built of limestone and mud brick, their walls plastered white against the North African sun. Rooms open inward onto central light wells. Terracotta bathtubs sit in ground-floor washing rooms. Bread ovens occupy corners of kitchens where women grind emmer wheat on basalt hand mills. Floors in wealthier homes bear simple geometric mosaics in black and white tessera. Storage jars hold olive oil, salted fish, wine, and dried pulses. The markets of Carthage pulse with the commerce of 3 continents. Stalls display Iberian silver jewelry, Egyptian faience beads, Greek painted pottery purchased or imitated by local craftsmen, and bolts of linen dyed in shades from saffron yellow to the deep violet of Tyrian purple. Metalworkers hammer bronze fittings in open-fronted workshops. Potters shape amphorae on kick wheels, stamping them with Punic merchant marks before firing. The smell of roasting grain, coriander and cumin drifts through narrow streets where donkeys carry loads of charcoal and dried fish. Clothing follows Phoenician tradition adapted to the African climate. Men wear long tunics of linen or wool, sometimes belted, with a rectangular mantle draped over one shoulder. Women favor ankle-length robes, often embroidered at the hem, with jewelry of gold, carnelian, and glass paste. Children run barefoot through the lower quarters near the commercial port, where sailors from a dozen nations unload cargo. The diet of ordinary Carthaginians centers on bread, olives, dried figs, lentils, chickpeas, and fish, tuna, sardines, and the fermented fish sauce that Punic traders export across the Western Sea. Meat appears less frequently, reserved for feast days and sacrificial meals shared after temple rituals. Wine is consumed diluted with water, as throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. This is the civilization that the warships defend and the merchants enrich, not merely a trading post grown large, but a deeply rooted agricultural and urban society whose hinterland feeds its population, funds its armies, and sustains the commercial networks that stretch from the Atlantic coast to the shores of the Eastern Sea. The wealth of Carthage is not only counted in silver ingots stacked in harbour warehouses. It grows in the dark soil of the Bagradus Valley, pressed from olives in stone mills, baked in bread ovens, and carried to market on the backs of labourers whose names no inscription preserves. The island of Sicily sits at the centre of the Mediterranean like a stone dropped between 2 worlds. To its east, the Greek colonies, Syracuse, Acragas, Selinus, Gela, spread across fertile coastal plains, their temples rising white against blue sky. To its west, Carthaginian settlements cling to the shoreline, Motia on its tiny island connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway, Panormus in its sheltered bay, Lilybaeum on the westernmost cape. For more than 2 centuries, this island becomes the arena where Punic merchant power and Greek military ambition collide in a series of wars that test both civilizations to their limits. The first great confrontation comes in 480 before the Common Era. Hamilcar, grandson of Mago, lands an enormous force on Sicily's northern coast. Ancient sources claim 300,000 men, though the true number is certainly smaller. His target is Himera, a Greek city allied with the tyrant Theron of Acragas. But Gelon, tyrant of Syracuse, marches to Himera's defense. The battle that follows is catastrophic for Carthage. Hamilcar dies, by his own hand at the sacrificial fire, according to Herodotus, and his army is shattered. The defeat echoes across the western Mediterranean. Carthage withdraws from Sicilian expansion for 7 decades, turning its energies inward toward Africa and Sardinia. The return comes in 409 before the Common Era, driven by vengeance and opportunity. Hannibal Mago, grandson of the Hamilcar who fell at Himera, crosses to Sicily with a powerful army. Selinus falls first, its walls breached, its population massacred. Then Himera itself is taken and destroyed. The temples where Hamilcar burned are leveled. 3,000 prisoners are sacrificed at the site of his death. Carthage reclaims western Sicily with brutal efficiency. Yet Syracuse remains unconquered. In 397 before the Common Era, the Carthaginian general Himilco besieges the great city itself. His fleet fills the harbor. His army encamps before the walls. Then plague strikes, devastating, relentless, and the Carthaginian force disintegrates. Himilco sails home in disgrace and takes his own life. The pattern repeats across decades. Carthaginian armies advance, achieve partial conquest, then falter before Syracuse's walls or succumb to disease in Sicily's marshy lowlands. In 339 before the Common Era, the Corinthian general Timoleon inflicts a crushing defeat on a Carthaginian army at the Crimisus River in western Sicily. Rain swells the river as Carthaginian troops attempt to cross. The sacred band of Carthage, 2,500 citizen soldiers drawn from the city's noblest families, is annihilated. The loss shocks Carthage. Yet the city recovers, as it always does, rebuilding its Sicilian garrisons, fortifying Lilybaeum into an impregnable stronghold. The most audacious challenge comes from Agathocles, tyrant of Syracuse. In 310 before the Common Era, besieged in his own city by a Carthaginian army, Agathocles makes an astonishing decision. He loads his remaining soldiers onto 60 ships, breaks through the Carthaginian naval blockade, and sails directly to Africa. He lands near the Cap Bon Peninsula, burns his fleet to prevent retreat, and marches toward Carthage itself. For the first time, war reaches the fields of the Bagradus Valley. Carthaginian estates burn. The city mobilizes its citizens for defense. Agathocles ravages the hinterland for 3 years before his African campaign collapses through desertion and failed alliances with Libyan rebels. He slips back to Sicily, leaving his army to surrender. The Sicilian wars produce no final victor. Carthage holds the western third of the island, Motia, Panormus, Lilybaeum, while Syracuse dominates the east. The boundary hardens into a frontier of watchtowers, fortified hilltops, and contested river crossings. Each war drains Carthaginian treasuries and mercenary reserves. Each war forces Carthage to rely more heavily on hired soldiers from Iberia, Gaul, Libya, and the Balearic Islands rather than its own citizens. The mercenary armies fight well, but owe no loyalty beyond their pay. This dependence will prove dangerous. And across the narrow strait separating Sicily from the Italian peninsula, a new power watches the island with growing interest. A power that has just unified Italy under its command, and now looks south across the water toward the richest prize in the Western Sea. That new power is Rome. In 264 before the Common Era, a crisis erupts in Messana, the city perched on the narrow strait between Sicily and Italy. A band of Campanian mercenaries called the Mamertines, cornered between Syracusan aggression and Carthaginian intervention, appeals to Rome for protection. The Roman Senate hesitates, but the popular assembly votes for war. Roman legions cross the strait into Sicily for the first time, and the collision that will reshape the ancient world begins. The early campaigns on land favor Rome. Legionary discipline overwhelms Carthaginian mercenary forces in open battle, and Syracuse quickly switches allegiance to the Roman side. Within 2 years, Rome controls most of eastern Sicily. But Carthage holds the western coastline, and its navy commands the surrounding waters. Roman supply lines stretch dangerously across open sea, vulnerable to Carthaginian quinqueremes that patrol with practiced efficiency. Rome recognizes the problem with brutal clarity. A land power cannot defeat a maritime empire without ships. What follows is one of history's most remarkable acts of military adaptation. Roman shipwrights, working from a captured Carthaginian quinquereme beached on the Italian coast, replicate the vessel plank by plank. Within 60 days, according to ancient sources, 100 warships slide from hastily constructed yards along the Tyrrhenian shore. The crews are raw, the rowers untested. But Roman engineers add a decisive innovation, the corvus, a heavy boarding bridge fitted with an iron spike that drops onto an enemy deck, locking the ships together and transforming naval combat into infantry warfare. At the Battle of Mylae in 260 before the Common Era, the consul Gaius Duilius leads this improvised fleet against a confident Carthaginian squadron. The corvus negates generations of Punic seamanship. Carthaginian vessels, grappled and boarded, fall one after another. Rome wins its first naval victory, and Duilius receives a triumph adorned with captured ship rams. Emboldened, Rome attempts a decisive stroke. In 256, a massive fleet carrying the legions of Marcus Atilius Regulus crosses to Africa and lands near Carthage itself. Initial victories on African soil raise Roman hopes of ending the war at its source. But Carthage hires the Spartan mercenary commander Xanthippus, who reorganizes the defense and deploys war elephants and cavalry across the flat Tunisian plain at the Battle of Tunis. The Roman army is annihilated. Regulus is captured. The fleet sent to evacuate survivors is destroyed by a storm off the southern Sicilian coast. 280 ships lost, perhaps 100,000 men drowned. It is one of the greatest naval disasters in ancient history. Yet Rome rebuilds. Fleet after fleet is constructed, lost to storms or battle, and constructed again. The war grinds on for 23 years, centered increasingly on the siege of Lilybaeum, Carthage's last great fortress on Sicily's western tip. Its walls hold. Meanwhile, a young Carthaginian general named Hamilcar Barca wages a brilliant guerrilla campaign from the heights of Mount Eryx, raiding Roman positions, cutting supply lines, and remaining undefeated for 6 years. But Carthage, exhausted financially, fails to reinforce him or rebuild its fleet. Rome finds the resources for one final effort. In 242, a fleet of 200 quinqueremes, funded by private loans from wealthy Roman citizens, sails to Sicilian waters. On the 10th of March, 241 before the Common Era, this fleet intercepts a Carthaginian supply convoy near the Aegates Islands off western Sicily. The battle is decisive. 50 Carthaginian ships are sunk, 70 captured. Carthage has nothing left to send. Hamilcar Barca, unbeaten on land, receives orders to negotiate. The Treaty of Lutatius strips Carthage of Sicily entirely and imposes an indemnity of 3,200 talents of silver payable over 10 years. Sicily becomes Rome's first overseas province. The Western Mediterranean's balance of power shifts irreversibly. Carthage remains wealthy, its African territories intact, its commercial networks still vast. But the aura of naval invincibility is shattered. and the mercenary armies returning from Sicily, unpaid and bitter, are about to turn their weapons against the city that hired them. The mercenaries gather at Sicca, a town southwest of Carthage, waiting for the pay they were promised. 20,000 men, Libyans, Iberians, Gauls, Ligurians, Balearic slingers, half-Greek deserters, a patchwork army bound by nothing but the expectation of silver. Carthage, drained by 23 years of war and a crushing indemnity owed to Rome, attempts to negotiate the sum downward. It is a catastrophic miscalculation. By late 241 before the Common Era, the mercenaries march on Tunis and make camp within sight of Carthage's walls. Two leaders emerge from the ranks: Spendius, a runaway Roman slave who knows that capture means crucifixion, and Mathos, a Libyan officer whose grievances run deeper than unpaid wages. The revolt spreads with terrifying speed. Libyan towns and villages, long resentful of Carthaginian taxation and land seizure, join the rebellion. 70,000 men are soon under arms. Carthage's subject cities across North Africa fall one after another. The great metropolis finds itself besieged in its own hinterland, its grain supply threatened, its authority collapsing. What follows is savagery that the historian Polybius calls the Truculus War, a conflict without rules, without negotiation, without mercy. Prisoners on both sides are tortured and killed. Carthaginian generals captured early in the fighting are crucified. The mercenaries mutilate envoys sent to parley. Carthage responds with equal brutality, trampling captives beneath elephants. The war degenerates into a cycle of atrocity that horrifies even the ancient Mediterranean world. Carthage turns to the one commander whose reputation survived Sicily unbroken. Hamilcar Barca takes the field with a small but disciplined force, perhaps 10,000 men, supplemented by cavalry and war elephants. His campaign is a masterwork of maneuver. He avoids pitched battle against superior numbers, instead cutting supply lines, isolating rebel contingents, and exploiting divisions between Libyan and foreign mercenaries. At the Battle of the Bagradus River, he lures Spendius into a trap, encircling and destroying a major rebel force. Mathos holds out longer, but by 237 before the Common Era, the last rebel strongholds fall. Both leaders are captured. Spendius is crucified beneath the walls of Tunis. Mathos is paraded through Carthage and tortured to death. The state survives, but the crisis has revealed its vulnerability. And Rome, watching from across the sea, exploits the moment with cold precision. In 238, while Carthage fights for its existence, Rome seizes Sardinia and Corsica, territories not covered by the peace treaty, and threatens war if Carthage resists. Carthage, unable to fight on two fronts, submits and pays an additional 1,200 talents. The seizure is naked opportunism, and it burns in Carthaginian memory. Hamilcar Barca draws a conclusion that will reshape the Western Mediterranean. Carthage cannot recover through its diminished African territories alone. It needs new resources, new armies, new strategic depth. In 237, he crosses to southern Iberia with his army, his son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair, and his 9-year-old son Hannibal. The peninsula offers everything Carthage requires. The silver mines of the southeast produce wealth rivaling what Sicily once provided. Iberian and Celtiberian warriors offer a recruiting ground for armies loyal to the Barcid family rather than to Carthage's fractious senate. For 9 years, Hamilcar campaigns across southern and eastern Iberia, conquering tribes through a combination of military force, marriage alliances, and diplomacy. He founds Acroluci as his base. The silver flows back to Carthage, replenishing the treasury, funding new construction, silencing political opponents. In 228, Hamilcar dies in battle, drowned while covering his son's retreat from a hostile tribe. Hasdrubal the Fair assumes command. He consolidates Barcid territory through diplomacy rather than war, and in 228 founds Carthago Nova, New Carthage, modern Cartagena, on a magnificent natural harbour backed by silver-rich hills. The city becomes the Barcid capital in Iberia, a mirror of Carthage itself with its own harbours, temples, and administrative quarter. Rome, growing uneasy at this new Western power, negotiates the Ebro Treaty, establishing the Ebro River as the boundary of Carthaginian expansion. South of the river, Iberia belongs to the Barcids. North of it, Rome claims influence. When Hasdrubal is assassinated by a Celtic servant in 221, the army in Iberia acclaims a new commander by popular acclaim. He is 25 years old. His name is Hannibal Barca, and the oath he swore as a child at his father's altar is about to reshape the ancient world. Hannibal moves swiftly. Within 2 years of assuming command, he consolidates Barcid control over the Iberian interior, campaigning against the Olcards and the Vacae, hardening his polyglot army in mountain warfare and siegecraft. By the spring of 219 before the Common Era, he turns his attention to Saguntum, a prosperous Iberian city on the Mediterranean coast south of the Ebro, allied with Rome, yet sitting squarely within the Carthaginian sphere defined by treaty. The provocation is deliberate. Hannibal knows what a siege of Saguntum means. The city resists with extraordinary tenacity. Its walls rise on a steep ridge overlooking the coastal plain, and the defenders fight from every terrace and tower. For 8 months the siege grinds forward. Hannibal himself is wounded in the thigh by a javelin during an assault on the lower walls. Battering rams crack the limestone fortifications section by section. When Saguntum finally falls in the winter of 219, the city is gutted. Its wealth, silver, weapons, stores, flows into the Barcid war chest. Rome sends envoys to Carthage demanding Hannibal's surrender. The Carthaginian Senate refuses. The Second Punic War begins. But Hannibal has no intention of waiting for Rome to bring the war to Africa or Iberia. His plan is breathtaking in its audacity. He will march overland from Iberia, cross the Pyrenees, traverse southern Gaul, and force the Alpine passes to bring the war into Italy itself. In late spring of 218, he departs Carthago Nova with approximately 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. He leaves his brother Hasdrubal to hold Iberia with a substantial garrison. The army crosses the Ebro and pushes through the Pyrenees, subduing or bypassing hostile Iberian tribes. Hannibal detaches 11,000 reluctant soldiers and sends them home rather than march with unwilling men. By late summer, the column reaches the Rhone, wide and swift-flowing. Gallic tribes mass on the eastern bank to contest the crossing. Hannibal sends a detachment upstream to ford the river by night and strike the Gauls from behind. When smoke signals rise from the far bank, the main army launches across on hastily built rafts, dugout canoes, and improvised pontoons. The elephants cross on enormous earth-covered platforms towed by boats, some panicking and wading the final stretch through chest-deep water. A Roman force under Publius Cornelius Scipio, dispatched to intercept, arrives at the Rhone crossing days too late. Hannibal is already moving east towards the mountains. The Alpine crossing begins in autumn, when early snow already dusts the high passes. The exact route remains debated, perhaps the Col de Clapier, perhaps the Col de la Traversette, but the suffering is beyond dispute. The path narrows to ledges carved into limestone cliffs. Rock falls block the column. Hostile mountain tribes roll boulders onto the marching soldiers from above and ambush the baggage train at choke points. Elephants slip on ice-covered stone. Pack animals tumble into ravines, their loads of grain and equipment lost. At one notorious blocked passage, Hannibal's engineers heat the rock face with bonfires and crack it with soured wine, widening the trail just enough for the elephants to pass. The descent into the Po Valley is almost worse than the climb. Exhausted men stumble down slopes of loose scree and frozen mud. Horses collapse. The army that emerges onto the plains of northern Italy in late autumn of 218 is a shadow of the force that left Iberia. Roughly 26,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry survive, barely half the original strength. Most of the elephants still live, though gaunt and weakened. Thousands of men lie frozen in alpine passes or buried under rock slides, their bones mingling with the bones of horses and mules along trails that will bear the memory of this crossing for centuries. Yet the army that descends is not broken. It is forged. These are veterans who have marched 1,500 kilometers, crossed 3 mountain ranges, forded the greatest river in Gaul, and survived conditions that no Mediterranean army has ever attempted. Numidian horsemen, Libyan spearmen, Iberian swordsmen, Balearic slingers, they have endured together what should have been impossible. And their commander, 28 years old, wounded, sleepless, leading from the front through every ambush and every frozen pass, now stands on Italian soil with the full weight of his father's oath, pressing forward into the heartland of Rome. The Po Valley opens before them like a promise. Within weeks of descending from the Alps, Hannibal finds what he needs: Gallic tribes nursing fresh grievances against Roman colonization, eager to join any army marching south. His depleted force swells with Celtic warriors, and by December of 218 before the Common Era, he commands a reconstituted army positioned along the Trebbia River, a tributary of the Po, in the heart of Cisalpine Gaul. The consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus is impatient. Against the counsel of his wounded colleague Publius Cornelius Scipio, he orders his legions across the freezing river at dawn, the soldiers wading chest-deep through icy water without having eaten. On the far bank, Hannibal's forces wait in prepared positions, rested and fed. The Carthaginian center absorbs the Roman advance, while Numidian cavalry hammers both flanks. Then the trap closes. Hannibal's brother Mago, concealed since before dawn with 2,000 picked men in a brushy ravine behind the Roman line, strikes from the rear. The Roman army disintegrates. Perhaps 20,000 escape. The rest perish in the frozen mud or drown attempting to recross the swollen Trebbia. Spring brings Hannibal south through the Apennines. He chooses the most difficult route, through the flooded marshlands of the Arno, where his army wades for 4 days through waist-deep water. Hannibal himself loses the sight in one eye to infection. Yet the suffering purchases surprise. In June of 217 before the Common Era, near Lake Trasimene in Etruria, he springs the largest ambush in ancient military history. The consul Gaius Flaminius marches his army of 25,000 along a narrow lakeside road, fog clinging to the water. Hannibal's forces, hidden along the wooded ridgeline above, descend simultaneously along the entire Roman column. There is no battle formation, no tactical response, only slaughter. Flaminius dies fighting. 15,000 Romans are killed in 3 hours. Thousands more stumble into the lake and drown beneath the weight of their armor. Rome reels. The Senate appoints Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator, and he adopts a strategy of deliberate avoidance, shadowing Hannibal's army, denying pitched battle, harassing foragers, burning crops before the Carthaginian advance. The Romans call him the delayer. It is wise but deeply unpopular. Roman pride demands confrontation. By the summer of 216 before the Common Era, Rome raises the largest army in its history. 8 legions with allied contingents, approximately 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. Under the consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. They march south to Apulia, to the flat agricultural plain near the village of Cannae, along the Aufidus River, where Hannibal has seized a Roman grain depot. On the 2nd of August, the armies meet. Hannibal deploys roughly 50,000 men in a formation of calculated vulnerability. His Gallic and Iberian infantry form a shallow, convex crescent at the center, deliberately bowing forward towards the Romans. On each flank stand deep columns of Libyan heavy infantry, veterans armed with captured Roman equipment. His cavalry, Numidians on the right, Iberians and Gauls on the left under Hasdrubal, outnumber the Roman horse nearly 3-1. The Roman legions advance into the bulging center and push it back. The crescent inverts, becoming concave, drawing the densely packed Roman infantry deeper into a narrowing pocket. The legionaries press forward, believing they are winning. They do not see the Libyan columns pivoting inward on both sides like closing doors. Behind them, Hasdrubal's cavalry, having routed the Roman horse on both flanks, wheels around and seals the rear. The encirclement is complete. 80,000 men compressed into a killing ground so tight that many cannot raise their weapons. The slaughter continues for hours. By evening, between 50 and 70,000 Romans lie dead on the Apulian plain, among them the consul Paulus, 80 senators, and nearly a third of Rome's governing class. It is the single bloodiest day in Roman history. Capua, the second city of Italy, defects to Hannibal. So do much of Samnium, Lucania, and Bruttium. Philip V of Macedon opens negotiations for alliance. Syracuse turns against Rome. The Mediterranean world watches, expecting Roman surrender. It does not come. The Senate refuses to ransom prisoners. It refuses to negotiate. It begins raising new legions from boys and slaves. Rome chooses survival through endurance, and in that refusal lies the seed of everything that follows. Rome chooses endurance, and endurance becomes strategy. In the years following Cannae, the Senate appoints Fabius Maximus as the guiding intelligence behind a war of patience. No more pitched battles against Hannibal on open ground. Instead, Rome fights the war Hannibal cannot win, a war of sieges, reconquest, and slow strangulation. Hannibal winters in Capua, and later Roman writers will claim the city's luxuries softened his army. The truth is simpler and more brutal. Carthage sends almost nothing. The Senate in Carthage, divided between factions and distracted by wars in Iberia, dispatches reinforcements that are inadequate, late, or diverted entirely. Hannibal holds southern Italy with an army that cannot be replaced, in a land where every lost soldier is subtracted from a total that will never grow. Rome, meanwhile, rebuilds relentlessly. By 212 before the Common Era, Marcus Claudius Marcellus besieges Syracuse, which had defected to Carthage under the influence of Hieronymus and his successors. The city holds for 2 years, its defences augmented by the war machines of Archimedes, great cranes that lift Roman ships from the water, mirrors and burning devices that terrorize the fleet. But Syracuse falls. Marcellus takes the city, and Archimedes dies in the sack, killed by a Roman soldier who does not recognize him. Sicily returns fully to Roman control. The following year, Rome recaptures Capua. The city's senators are executed. Its lands are confiscated. The message reverberates through every Italian community that had joined Hannibal. Defection carries a price that survival under Rome does not. One by one, the allies who turned to Carthage after Cannae begin turning back. Tarentum, the great Greek port city of southern Italy, falls to Fabius Maximus in 209 before the Common Era through betrayal from within its own garrison. In Iberia, the war takes a decisive turn. The young Publius Cornelius Scipio, barely 25, receives command of Roman forces in Spain after both his father and uncle perish fighting the Barcids. In 209 before the Common Era, Scipio launches a surprise assault on Carthago Nova itself, the Barcid capital in Iberia, its treasury, its arsenal, its harbour. He takes the city in a single day by sending troops through the shallow lagoon at low tide. The silver mines, the hostages, the war chest, all fall into Roman hands. Within 4 years, Scipio drives every Carthaginian army from the peninsula. Hasdrubal Barca, Hannibal's brother, escapes Iberia with the remnants of his forces. He crosses the Pyrenees, recruits Gallic warriors, and in 207 before the Common Era attempts the same Alpine crossing his brother achieved 11 years earlier. His mission is simple and desperate: join Hannibal in Italy, combine their armies, and force a decisive engagement before Rome grows too strong. He never arrives. Roman intelligence intercepts his dispatches to Hannibal. The consuls Gaius Claudius Nero and Marcus Livius Salinata converge on Hasdrubal's army at the Metaurus River in Umbria. Nero marches his forces north in secret from Hannibal's front in Bruttium, a forced march of over 250 miles in 7 days. The combined Roman army attacks at dawn. Hasdrubal, realizing the battle is lost, charges into the Roman lines and dies fighting. Days later, Roman horsemen ride to Hannibal's camp in the far south. They hurl an object over the palisade. It is his brother's severed head. According to ancient sources, Hannibal stares at the face he has not seen in over a decade and speaks quietly. He recognizes in that moment the fate of Carthage. For the remaining years, Hannibal holds Bruttium, the toe of the Italian boot, like a man gripping a shrinking island. He wins no more great battles. He loses no decisive ones. His army, a patchwork of Bruttian levies, aging veterans, and local recruits, sustains itself through raiding and fortification. Rome does not attack him directly. It does not need to. The war has moved beyond Italy. Scipio is preparing something far more ambitious, an invasion of Africa itself, aimed at the walls of Carthage. The greatest general of his age stands in the forests of southern Italy, undefeated and irrelevant, waiting for a summons that will come too late. The summons comes in 203 before the Common Era. Carthage, besieged by panic, recalls Hannibal from Italy. But by then the war has already shifted to African soil, and the man who engineered that shift is Publius Cornelius Scipio. 1 year earlier, in the spring of 204, Scipio lands near Utica with roughly 26,000 Roman and allied troops. The Senate had hesitated for years, reluctant to authorize an African campaign while Hannibal still occupied Italian territory. Scipio, elected consul at 31, assembled his force largely from volunteers and the disgraced survivors of Cannae, men burning to redeem themselves. Their transports cross from Lilybaeum in Sicily, and the army establishes a fortified camp on the Cape Farina Peninsula, overlooking the Bay of Tunis. The limestone headlands of Africa stretch before them, golden in the late afternoon light. Carthage responds by assembling a combined force under Hasdrubal Gisco and the Numidian king Syphax, whose alliance had been secured through marriage to Hasdrubal's daughter Sophonisba. Their camps sprawl across the plains south of Utica, vast enclosures of reed huts and timber shelters housing tens of thousands. Scipio feigns peace negotiations through the winter, sending envoys who carefully observe the layout of both camps. Then, on a single spring night in 203, he strikes. Roman columns advance in darkness and set fire to Syphax's camp first. As Carthaginian troops rush from their own encampment to aid their allies, they find Roman soldiers already among the flames. The conflagration consumes both armies. Ancient sources claim 40,000 dead. The number may be inflated, but the devastation is real. Carthaginian military power in Africa shatters in a single night of fire. Syphax flees westward, but is pursued and captured by Massinissa, the rival Numidian prince who has allied himself with Rome. Massinissa's cavalry, swift, disciplined, raised on the high steppe of eastern Numidia, becomes Scipio's decisive instrument. With Syphax eliminated, Massinissa claims the unified Numidian kingdom, and Scipio gains the mobile striking force that Carthage itself once wielded through its Numidian alliances. Carthage sues for an armistice while urgently recalling Hannibal. He departs Italy in the autumn of 203, landing at Hadrumatum on the Tunisian coast with perhaps 15,000 veterans. He has not set foot on African soil since childhood. The army he now commands is a composite force, his Italian veterans, hastily levied Carthaginian citizens, Numidian recruits of uncertain loyalty, and 80 war elephants, many only partially trained. In October of 202, the two armies meet at Zama, a location southwest of Carthage in the open plains of the upper Bagradus Valley. The day before battle, Hannibal and Scipio meet face to face between the lines. No record preserves their exact words, but the meeting produces no agreement. Both commanders understand that the fate of the Western Mediterranean will be decided the following morning. Hannibal opens with his elephants, 80 beasts charging toward the Roman line. Scipio has prepared for this. His maniples stand in columns rather than the traditional checkerboard, creating corridors through which the elephants pass harmlessly, funneled by trumpets and javelins into empty lanes. Many elephants, panicked and wounded, turn back into the Carthaginian left wing, disrupting their own cavalry. Massinissa's Numidian horsemen and the Roman cavalry exploit the chaos, driving the Carthaginian mounted forces from the field. The infantry engagement that follows is brutal and prolonged. Hannibal's front lines, mercenaries, and new levies break against the Roman heavy infantry, but his veteran third line holds firm. For a grinding interval, the battle hangs in balance. Then Massinissa and the Roman cavalry return from their pursuit and strike the Carthaginian rear. The envelopment that Hannibal perfected at Cannae is now turned against him. His army collapses. 20,000 Carthaginians die on the field. An equal number are captured. The peace terms dictated in 201 before the Common Era are designed to end Carthage as a military power. The city surrenders all territory outside Africa. Its fleet is reduced to 10 warships. It must pay 10,000 talents of silver over 50 years. It cannot wage war against anyone without Roman permission. Massinissa's Numidia, Rome's loyal client, now borders Carthage on every landward side. The Purple Empire of the Sea becomes a commercial city permitted to exist at Rome's pleasure. The harbour still functions. That is the remarkable thing. Stripped of its war fleet, humiliated by treaty, Carthage nonetheless rises each morning to the sound of commerce. Merchant vessels crowd the rectangular commercial port, loading amphorae of olive oil, casks of garum, bales of dyed wool. The circular military harbour, once home to 220 warships, now shelters only 10, the pitiful allowance Rome has granted. But the commercial basin thrums with activity. Carthaginian traders, forbidden from waging war, do what they have always done best. They trade. Within a decade of Zama, Carthage begins an economic recovery that astonishes even its conquerors. The fertile Bagradus Valley yields enormous harvests of wheat and barley. Olive plantations expand across the Tunisian hinterland, worked by Libyan laborers on estates managed with the scientific precision of Mago's agricultural methods. The city pays its annual installments of silver with such regularity that by 151 before the Common Era, it offers to pay the entire remaining balance at once. Rome refuses. The debt is a leash, and Rome intends to hold it. Hannibal himself drives the early recovery. Elected suffete in 196 before the Common Era, he attacks the corruption that has hollowed Carthaginian governance. He discovers that wealthy oligarchs on the tribunal of 104 have been diverting public revenues into private accounts. He pushes through reforms requiring annual election of tribunal members and transparent accounting of state finances. Tax collection improves. The treasury stabilizes. But Hannibal's reforms make powerful enemies among the aristocratic families whose privileges he threatens. They send word to Rome that Hannibal is conspiring with Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire to renew war against the Republic. Rome demands his surrender. In 195 before the Common Era, Hannibal flees Carthage by night, sailing east to the court of Antiochus at Ephesus. The greatest general of his age becomes a wandering exile. He advises Antiochus during the war against Rome, but his counsel is largely ignored. After Antiochus's defeat at Magnesia in 190 before the Common Era, Hannibal moves to Armenia, then to the court of Prusias of Bithynia. Roman agents pursue him relentlessly. Around 183 before the Common Era, cornered in Prusias's palace at Libissa on the Sea of Marmara, Hannibal takes poison rather than submit to Roman chains. The man who shattered 8 Roman legions at Cannae dies alone in a foreign land. Back in Carthage, the slow strangulation continues. Massinissa, king of Numidia and Rome's faithful client, systematically encroaches on Carthaginian territory. His cavalry raids farmland along the western frontier. He seizes the fertile district of the Emporia along the Lesser Syrtis. Each time Carthage appeals to Rome for arbitration, senatorial commissions arrive, investigate, and rule in Massinissa's favor. The pattern is deliberate. Rome needs Carthage weak and Numidia strong. The city endures. Oil presses turn in courtyard workshops. Merchants negotiate in the agora beneath Byrsa Hill. Terracotta rooftops stretch towards the sea. The population approaches 300,000. Wealth accumulates in warehouses and private vaults. Yet every diplomatic humiliation reminds Carthage that prosperity without sovereignty is merely permitted existence. In 153 before the Common Era, the Roman senator Marcus Porcius Cato visits Carthage as part of an arbitration commission. What he sees alarms him, not ruin, but vitality. Orchards heavy with fruit, harbors crowded with ships, a city thriving despite 50 years of subjugation. Cato returns to Rome carrying fresh Carthaginian figs, displaying them before the Senate to demonstrate how close and how dangerous this recovered city remains. From that day forward, whatever the subject of debate, Cato ends every speech with the same words, "Carthage must be destroyed." The phrase becomes a drumbeat in Roman political life, steady and inexorable, shaping opinion toward a conclusion that has nothing to do with justice and everything to do with fear. Across the sea, Carthaginians press olives, weave cloth, and load ships, unaware that their very success is writing their death sentence. The pretext arrives in 150 before the Common Era. Massinissa, now nearly 90 years old and emboldened by decades of Roman indulgence, seizes the fertile district around the town of Oroscopa in Carthaginian territory. Carthage, exhausted by half a century of territorial theft, finally strikes back. An army of 25,000 marches against Numidian forces and is destroyed. The defeat matters less than the act itself. Carthage has waged war without Roman permission, violating the Treaty of 201. Rome has its justification. The Senate dispatches an army of 80,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry under the consuls, Manius Manilius and Lucius Marcius Censorinus. They land at Utica in 149 before the Common Era. Carthaginian envoys rush to negotiate, offering unconditional surrender. Rome accepts, then issues its demands in stages, each more devastating than the last. First, 300 hostages from noble families. Carthage complies. Then the surrender of all weapons and armor. Carts roll out of the city gates carrying 200,000 sets of arms and 2,000 catapults. The city stands naked. Only then does Rome reveal its final condition. Carthage must be abandoned entirely. The population must relocate at least 10 miles from the sea. The city itself will be razed. The response is fury. Gates slam shut. The Senate of Carthage votes for war. Inside the walls, a transformation begins that astonishes even Roman observers. Citizens strip temples of bronze ornaments and melt them into swords and spearheads. Workshops operate through the night forging weapons. Women cut their long hair and braid it into cordage for catapults. The city becomes a single forge, a single purpose. Hasdrubal the Boethach takes command of the defense, organizing the population into a garrison of extraordinary determination. The triple wall system protecting the landward approach stretches nearly 22 miles around the peninsula. The outer wall rises 45 feet, backed by a second wall and a deep ditch. Stables within the fortifications house 300 elephants and 4,000 horses. The Romans, expecting a swift capitulation, find instead a city bristling with improvised armament and desperate resolve. For 2 years, Roman commanders achieve almost nothing. Assaults on the walls fail. Naval attacks on the harbors stall. Disease thins the besieging army. The war becomes an embarrassment. In 147, Rome appoints Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus, adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, as consul and commander despite his youth. He imposes discipline immediately, cutting off supply routes, constructing a massive mole across the harbour mouth to seal the commercial port, and systematically tightening the siege. Carthaginian defenders dig a new channel from the military harbour to the open sea and launch a hastily built fleet of 50 warships, but the breakout fails to lift the blockade. By spring of 146, Scipio breaches the harbour district. What follows is not a battle, but an annihilation. Roman soldiers fight street by street, house by house, ascending toward Byrsa Hill through 6 days of continuous combat. Buildings are set ablaze, defenders retreat upward through narrow lanes choked with rubble and bodies. Civilians trapped in upper stories leap from rooftops rather than face capture. Hasdrubal's wife, watching her husband surrender at Scipio's feet, takes her children and walks into the flames of the burning temple of Eshmun. When silence finally falls over Byrsa, 50,000 survivors emerge from the ruins. All are sold into slavery. Scipio orders the city systematically demolished. Temples, harbours, walls, houses, everything is pulled down. The rubble is scattered. A formal curse is pronounced over the ground. The territory of Carthage becomes the Roman province of Africa, administered from Utica. Watching the flames, Scipio reportedly weeps, murmuring lines from Homer about the fall of Troy, sensing that what Rome inflicts today may one day be visited upon Rome itself. The ashes settle over the Bay of Tunis. 668 years after its founding, the new city ceases to exist. For a generation, the cursed ground lies empty. Wild grasses push through the rubble of what had been the greatest city in the western Mediterranean. Shepherds graze flocks across the levelled plateau of Byrsa. The harbours silt over. Rain fills the foundations of vanished temples, creating shallow pools where frogs breed in summer. The Roman province of Africa, administered from nearby Utica, thrives on the same fertile soil that once fed Carthaginian ambitions. But the city itself remains a wound in the landscape, a deliberate absence enforced by senatorial decree and sacred curse. The first attempt at resurrection comes in 122 before the Common Era. The tribune Gaius Gracchus, seeking land for Rome's dispossessed citizens, proposes a colony on the site called Colonia Junonia. 6,000 settlers are allocated plots. Surveyors arrive and begin laying boundary stones across the ruins. But political enemies in Rome seize upon the sacred prohibition. Reports circulate that wolves have torn up the boundary markers, that omens condemn the venture. The Senate revokes the colony's charter. The settlers who have already arrived retain their individual land grants, but the formal refounding dies in Roman political warfare. The ground remains officially cursed. It takes a dictator to break the prohibition. In 46 before the Common Era, Julius Caesar, fresh from victory in the African campaign against Pompeian loyalists, decrees the establishment of Colonia Julia Carthago. Caesar understands what the Senate has long denied, that the site's natural harbour, its proximity to fertile grain lands, and its command of central Mediterranean shipping lanes make it irreplaceable. He does not live to see the colony built. His assassination in 44 before the Common Era leaves the project to his heir. Augustus completes what Caesar envisioned. Roman engineers arrive and begin transforming the landscape. They level the Byrsa summit further, creating an enormous artificial platform for a new civic centre. A Roman grid of streets is laid directly over the Punic ruins, oriented to different cardinal points, as if deliberately erasing the old city's memory from the very geometry of the ground. A capital temple rises on Byrsa. A forum takes shape below. The rectangular commercial harbour is dredged and restored. Aqueduct planning begins. Within 2 generations, the transformation is astonishing. By the reign of Augustus, Carthage functions as the capital of the province of Africa Proconsularis, governing the most productive agricultural region in the Western Empire. Grain ships depart its rebuilt harbour carrying wheat and barley to feed Rome's urban population. Olive oil flows in ceramic amphorae stamped with African workshop marks. The wealth accumulates visibly in stone. By the 2nd century of the Common Era, Carthage has become the empire's 2nd largest Latin-speaking city. Its population approaches 500,000. The Antonine Baths, constructed under the Emperor Antoninus Pius, rank among the largest bathing complexes outside Rome itself, their vaulted halls rising above the coastal bluff, their marble columns imported from quarries across the Mediterranean, their mosaic floors depicting Neptune and marine creatures in thousands of tessera pieces. An amphitheatre seating 30,000 occupies a natural hollow west of the city centre. A theatre and an Odeon host performances in Latin and occasionally Greek. The great aqueduct from Zaghuan, stretching over 130 kilometers across the Tunisian countryside on tiered stone arches, delivers fresh mountain water to the city's fountains, baths, and private villas. Those villas tell their own story. Wealthy Roman Africans commission elaborate floor mosaics depicting hunting scenes, chariot races, agricultural estates, and mythological narratives. The craftsmanship of Carthaginian mosaic workshops becomes famous across the empire. Courtyard houses feature peristyle gardens, private bathrooms with terracotta plumbing, and dining rooms oriented to catch evening breezes from the bay. The port exports not only grain and oil, but also garum fish sauce, wild animals for Roman arena spectacles, fine red slip pottery, and marble. African merchants maintain trading connections from Ostia to Alexandria. The city hums with commerce, administration, legal practice, and education. Rhetoric schools attract students from across the western provinces. Beneath the Roman grid, Punic foundations still lie buried. Occasionally, a construction crew uncovers an older wall, a fragment of Tanit Stele, a scorched layer of ash from 146 before the Common Era. These remnants are built over without ceremony. Roman Carthage does not mourn its predecessor. It simply occupies the same irreplaceable ground, proving what geography always knew, that this peninsula on the Bay of Tunis was destined to hold a great city, regardless of which civilization claimed it. The transformation begins not with an edict, but with blood. In the year 203 of the Common Era, a young noblewoman named Perpetua and her slave Felicity walk into the amphitheatre of Carthage to face wild beasts and the sword. Their martyrdom, recorded in a diary partly written by Perpetua herself, becomes one of the earliest and most intimate Christian texts in the Latin language. The arena where they die stands barely 1,000 paces from the old Tophet, where Carthaginians once made offerings to Tanit. The sacred geography of the city is shifting beneath the same North African sun. By this time, Carthage has already produced the most formidable Christian intellect of the 2nd century. Quintus Septimius Florens Tertullianus, Tertullian, born around 155 of the Common Era, writes in a Latin so fierce and inventive that he essentially creates the vocabulary of Western theology. Words like Trinity, sacrament, and substance enter Christian discourse through his pen. His treatises pour from Carthage between roughly 197 and 220, attacking paganism, defending persecuted believers, and demanding moral rigor with an intensity that mirrors the old Punic stubbornness of the city itself. He is the father of Latin Christianity, and he writes not from Rome but from Africa. Half a century later, Thascius Caecilius Cyprianus, Bishop Cyprian, governs the Christian community of Carthage with administrative brilliance during the Decian persecution of 250. His letters reveal a church already deeply organized, with deacons, presbyters, and a network of congregations stretching across the African provinces. When the Emperor Valerian renews persecution, Cyprian refuses to sacrifice to Roman gods. On the 14th of September, 258, he is beheaded outside the city. His execution transforms him into Africa's most revered martyr, and his tomb becomes a pilgrimage site where basilica walls rise within a generation. The scriptoria of Carthage multiply. Copyists working on papyrus and parchment produce theological texts, biblical manuscripts, and episcopal correspondence that circulate throughout the Western Mediterranean. Christian basilicas appear across the city, their apse walls oriented eastward, their floors laid with mosaics depicting vines, fish, and the Chi-Rho monogram. The old temples still stand, but attendance thins. The Antonine baths still function, the Forum still bustles, yet the intellectual center of gravity has moved to the bishop's residence and the baptisteries, where converts descend into stone pools. In the 370s, a restless young man from Thagaste arrives in Carthage to study rhetoric. Aurelius Augustinus, Augustine, finds a city of theatres, schools, competing philosophies, and sensual temptation. He later recalls Carthage as a cauldron of unholy loves, yet it is here that his extraordinary mind first encounters Cicero, Manichaeism, and the questions about evil and free will that will consume his life. He teaches rhetoric in the city before departing for Rome and Milan, where his conversion unfolds. But Carthage shaped him. The African Church shaped him. In 397, the Council of Carthage convenes under Bishop Aurelius, and with Augustine's profound influence, produces a canonical list of sacred scriptures that will define the Christian Bible for the Latin West. This council does not invent the canon, but it ratifies and transmits it with an authority that endures for centuries. Yet even as Christianity triumphs, it fractures. The Donatist controversy tears the African Church apart for over 100 years, pitting rigorists who reject clergy, who had surrendered scriptures during persecution against moderates who accept reconciliation. Donatist basilicas stand across from Catholic ones in the same cities. Augustine spends decades combating the schism through writing and through imperial enforcement. The walls of Christian Carthage still gleam with whitewash and mosaic, when, in 439, the Vandal fleet of Genseric crosses from Spain and seizes the city almost without resistance. The African voice that shaped Western Christianity falls under Aryan Germanic rule. But the texts have already traveled. The ideas have already taken root in every Latin-speaking province. Carthage, which once gave the Mediterranean purple dye and silver, has now given the Western world its theological language. Genseric does not destroy what he conquires. That is the crucial distinction. When the Vandal fleet crosses from Hispania and takes Carthage in 439 of the Common Era, the conqueror finds a city still magnificent, the Antonine baths still functioning, the villas still adorned with mosaic floors depicting Neptunian seas, the granaries still heavy with African wheat. The Vandal king simply moves in. His warriors, perhaps 80,000 souls including women and children, occupy the finest Roman estates along the coastal hills. They claim the land, redistribute the great senatorial properties, and install their Arian bishops in Catholic basilicas. The Vandal kingdom that takes shape over the following decades is a strange hybrid. Germanic warriors lounge in Roman bathhouses. Arian priests chant in churches built for Nicene congregations. Catholic clergy face periodic persecution, exile, confiscation, prohibition from ordaining new bishops. Yet the administrative machinery remains largely Roman. Latin continues as the language of governance and literature. The poet Dracontius composes verse in Vandal Carthage. The city's harbour still exports grain and olive oil, though now the profits flow to Vandal lords rather than Roman senators. Genseric himself rules until 477, nearly 4 decades of shrewd and ruthless command. His fleet raids the Mediterranean with impunity, sacking Rome itself in 455, carrying away treasures including, according to tradition, the sacred objects of the Temple of Jerusalem that Titus had brought to Rome centuries earlier. But the Vandal kingdom carries within it the weakness of a ruling minority governing a vast and resentful population. Berber tribes in the interior grow increasingly autonomous. Catholic North Africans chafe under Arian dominance. By the early 6th century, the dynasty fractures in succession disputes. In 533, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian dispatches his greatest general, Belisarius, with a force of roughly 15,000 soldiers. The campaign is astonishingly swift. Belisarius lands at Caput Vada, marches north, defeats the Vandal king Gelimer at the battles of Ad Decimum and Tricamarum, and enters Carthage in triumph in 534. The Vandal kingdom, after 95 years, simply collapses. Byzantine Carthage rises from the occupation with renewed purpose. Justinian orders the restoration of churches, the construction of new fortifications, and the re-establishment of Catholic orthodoxy. The city becomes the seat of the Byzantine Exarchate of Africa, a military administrative province governing the old Roman territories. New walls go up, often built hastily from the carved stones of earlier Roman monuments. Column drums stacked as foundation blocks, inscribed lintels turned sideways into defensive ramparts. The Basilica of Damus el Karita is restored. The harbour functions again under imperial authority. Yet Byzantine rule proves fragile. Berber revolts consume the interior for decades. Imperial taxation is heavy. The population, diminished by plague and war, never fully recovers its Roman-era density. Carthage endures as a provincial capital, important but diminished, its grandeur increasingly a memory maintained in aging stone. The final blow comes from the east. Arab armies, carrying the new faith of Islam, sweep across Egypt and into the Maghreb. In 698, the Arab commander Hassan ibn al-Nu'man besieges and captures Carthage. A brief Byzantine naval counterattack temporarily reclaims the city, but Hassan returns and takes it definitively. This time, the destruction is thorough. The walls are dismantled, the harbours are rendered unusable, the remaining population scatters. Nearby Tunis, a modest settlement on the inland lake, becomes the new regional capital. The stones of Carthage are carried away for construction elsewhere, into mosques, palaces, and fortifications across the new Islamic province of Ifriqiya. The city that Elissa founded 17 centuries earlier, that had survived Scipio's fire and risen again under Caesar, that had given Christianity its Latin voice and sheltered Vandal kings and Byzantine exarchs, finally falls silent. The hill of Byrsa stands empty above the bay. Wind moves through roofless chambers. The circular harbour silts over, becoming marsh, then farmland. Carthage ceases to be a living city and begins its long existence as a ruin, a quarry, and eventually a ghost whose stones are scattered across an entire civilization's foundations. Yet something persists. A civilization deliberately erased from the earth leaves traces that no fire, no plough, no centuries of silence can fully extinguish. The ghost of Carthage endures not in walls, but in the deep grammar of the world it shaped. Consider the soil itself. When Roman senators ordered the translation of Mago's 28-volume agricultural treatise into Latin, they preserved the knowledge of a Punic agronomist whose techniques for olive cultivation, vineyard management, and estate farming would define North African agriculture for 1,000 years. Roman landowners across the province of Africa planted their groves according to Carthaginian methods. The olive oil that fed the empire flowed from wisdom first codified in the Punic language. That language itself proved remarkably tenacious. Augustine of Hippo, writing in the early 5th century of the Common Era, noted that Punic was still spoken in the North African countryside, nearly 600 years after the destruction of the city. Farmers, villagers, and rural priests preserved fragments of a tongue whose alphabet had once revolutionized human communication. The Phoenician script that Carthage carried westward had already given birth to Greek, then Latin, then every alphabet of the Western world. The letters on this screen descend from marks first scratched by Levantine merchants 3,000 years ago. In religion, the goddess Tanit cast a long shadow. Scholars trace her influence through the cults of the Roman period, through the Celestis worshipped in African temples, and into the particular intensity of North African Christianity itself, with its emphasis on sacrifice, martyrdom, and the sacred feminine. The Tophet may have fallen silent, but the spiritual landscape it shaped did not vanish overnight. Then there is memory transformed into literature. Virgil, composing the Aeneid under Augustus, placed Carthage at the very heart of Rome's founding mythology. Dido becomes the tragic queen whose love for Aeneas and whose abandonment and death foreshadow the centuries of enmity between the two civilizations. In making Carthage essential to Rome's own story, Virgil ensured that the destroyed city would live forever in Western imagination. Modern archaeology began reclaiming the physical city in the 19th century. French excavations at Byrsa Hill, the Tophet, and the harbour district gradually revealed what ancient sources described. Thousands of stelae bearing the sign of Tanit emerged from the sacred precinct. The outlines of the circular military port were traced beneath centuries of sediment. Punic pottery, coins stamped with horse and palm, razor-thin bronze figurines, and inscribed funerary markers entered museum collections from Tunis to London to New York. In 1979, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization designated Carthage a World Heritage Site, formally recognizing the universal significance of what lay beneath the suburban villas of modern Tunis. Today, the site occupies a quiet residential suburb along the Bay of Tunis. Presidential palaces and diplomatic residences stand where Punic merchants once haggled over Spanish silver. The Carthage National Museum on Byrsa Hill displays artifacts spanning every phase of the city's existence, from Phoenician foundation to Byzantine collapse. Visitors walk among fragments of a civilization that once commanded the Western Mediterranean, that produced navigators who reached the tropics and agronomists whose books outlasted their libraries. The deeper legacy is conceptual. Carthage represents an alternative model of power, one built on commerce, naval reach, and networked alliance rather than territorial absorption. Its destruction raises questions that political philosophers have pondered for centuries about the relationship between economic power and military survival, about whether trading republics can endure against expansionist empires, about what is lost when a victor writes history and the vanquished leave only stones. The wind still moves across Byrsa Hill. Below, the ancient harbours are parkland now, their shapes still legible from the air, two geometric basins remembering the fleets they once sheltered. Somewhere beneath the grass and gravel lie foundation courses laid by settlers from Tyre, who believed they were building something that would last forever. In a sense, they were right. Carthage endures not as a city, but as a question the world has never fully answered. Thank you for journeying through the complete story of Carthage, from the harbours of Tyre to the silent hill above the Bay of Tunis. If this series has deepened your understanding of the ancient world, please consider subscribing so you will not miss the next historical journey.